We're live now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. What a week it's been so far. We knew this was going to happen. We knew this was going to take place regarding the US actually getting their hands bloody now, openly getting involved in the war against Iran. And it's really amazing and scary that now we can attack a country just for the thought process of them having a particular weapon. And Brother Yusuf mentioned actually as we were just gonna go live, this is Afghanistan, and of course for those young brothers and sisters who are watching this show, Iraq. They are using the same script again and again and again. And the most horrid thing is, brothers and sisters, as Muslims, we fall for it. Where are those imams who stood next to Trump on his election day, raising their hands up? You know, Trump saying, I will stop all wars or any conflicts. And what's actually happened? Where are those imams who stood on the platform holding hands with Trump, raising the fingers of like victory or some type of victory they've achieved for the Muslims? They should be hanging their heads down in shame. And with this, and we've got a very beautiful brother, as you brothers know, also in the chat joining me today. And he's going to come from a different perspective regarding this conflict. And of course, we'll be touching off the genocide that is continuing in Palestine, Africa, in Gaza. Even today, 40 plus, 50 plus civilians have been murdered, butchered by the IDF in Gaza. So I'm not going to really take too much of your time, brothers and sisters. I'm going to pass on the mic to Brother Yusuf Ismail. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Yusuf.
Wa alaikum salam. Greetings of peace to you and to some of the listeners out there. I mean, the last time we were having a program, we were talking about the killings, I think the killings by this group called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And we even established the fact that Israel, I mean, it's such an inversion of reality. Israel was using ISIS, you know, they were using ISIS in Gaza to murder the Palestinians and, of course, to oppose Hamas. And so a lot has happened since then. The one thing we shouldn't take the attention of the world seems to have shifted somewhat, although it's obviously part and parcel of this entire scheme of things. But the focus has kind of shifted away from what you just correctly pointed out, the genocide that's happening in Gaza. Because as we stand on a daily basis, you know, I didn't because I was so caught up with looking at some of the background of what's happening now. I didn't even catch the figures that indeed 40 people were killed by the Israeli Defense Force. People are going to these these so-called, what could I call, cages, entrapment cages set up by the sinister body called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. They're being shot dead. And that's happening on a daily basis. It's happening on a daily basis. It's happening regularly. And so we shouldn't basically fall into the trap of not being aware of what basically is happening. Now, this morning, of course, and you know, I obviously have to start with what's happened, is that this fanatic, narcissistic psychopath called Donald Trump, we never actually saw the footage, or at least I haven't seen it myself. I don't know if you have. I don't think there's actually footage of the bombings. But there was a tweet that was posted around about, at least from the South African time period, 3 o'clock this morning. So I kind of got it, you know, fudged around about 5:30, 6 o'clock. So I kind of got that at that particular point in time, where he made an announcement and he described it as a success story. I don't know if you can pick up the tweet, that 3 Iranian nuclear sites, or what he describes as nuclear sites, and actually not nuclear sites, were struck. And they were the facility at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. These are all, I mean, Isfahan, out of all of them, are probably well known. But Fordo and Natanz, I hadn't been familiar with these particular areas. but apparently the Fordo facility was heavily fortified. And so what had happened was that the United States used what they call bunker buster bombs, whereby the enrichment plant, which is basically, Fordo is a site. It's a uranium enrichment site that's deeply buried in the mountains. It's near the religious city of Qom, where the clergy and the clerics and the so-called Darul Ulums are there in Qom. So it's nearby there. Natanz, that's a nuclear facility. That's a uranium enrichment complex. That is near Isfahan in central Iran. And Isfahan, of course, that's the nuclear technology center. That's a research facility. I don't think there's much uranium enrichment taking place. I mean, there's a scientific, aspects, how uranium enrichment takes place. I don't know any of those details. I know nothing about nuclear science. I've got a very superficial understanding of it. So that's apparently a conversion and research facility that is in the southern city of Isfahan. And so what the reports go is that these kind of B-2 stealth bombers, each of these stealth bombers, they had 2 crew members. At midnight on Friday, then they called this Operation Midnight Hammer. Imagine the name, Operation Midnight Hammer. Like the Israeli operation, they call it Rising Lion. They have these terms that they use for them. So Operation Midnight Hammer. And what they did is that, as opposed to crossing the Atlantic Ocean, there was a decoy group that flew west of the Pacific. And the main strike group headed east with kind of minimal communications during what they would call an 18-hour flight. And so what then happened was that Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m., which would be yesterday afternoon for the United States, it would be middle of the morning for us, basically. Essentially, they then launched more than 24 Tomahawk missiles. Yes, I see you've just sent me something. We can put up the I don't know if you want to share it, but that's great.
Yeah, if you can share it. Yeah, go ahead and share it. I just want to say wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all the brothers and sisters joining us. MashaAllah, I really appreciate your support. Please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to go and subscribe to Brother Yusuf's channel, the South African Debate Initiative, as you can see in the title next to Yusuf's name. So please go there and like, share, and subscribe. Likewise, we'll be putting up some images that recently just actually come out from the US of the bombings that just took place in Iran, of these so-called nuclear depots where this kind of material is kept and built.
Well, whilst you get that up, I just want people to know.
I don't know if you can do it. I can't do it on my side.
Okay, let me try and see if I can do it. I just gonna go through some of the material, but I will try and put this up. But
there is a tweet there and all. There's a tweet by Trump.
There's a tweet. I'm going to try and open it, and I'm going to share this.
Yeah.
But I just want people to know that there were about approximately 125 United States aircraft that participated in this. Apparently, it was called the B-25. Let me share this. Let me share what we are looking at so that people kind of get. So we're not speaking in a vacuum, and then people know what we're talking about. I'm going to basically. Let me show. There's two. There's a Guardian report and there's the Al Jazeera report. I'll in fact show both, but let me just start off with the Guardian report first. So the Guardian report, if you can just show the Guardian report. Basically, here we are. I think it's far more clinical the way they did it. So this is June 20th. That's the site, and then of course you see June 22nd. If you can see this. June 22nd. If you look at June 22nd, that would be today, and this is how it is. So this is how the site was on June 20th. Can you see that there? And then as we go, June 22nd. So there seems to be there, but the buildings are still available. This is June 22nd. So as many people have stated, How much damage these have done, nobody knows. This is a Fordo enrichment facility. In fact, I saw a report earlier on this morning. I must just access that particular report. Let me just see if I can access a report here, where apparently we were informed that there was very little damage done. There was not much damage done. I sent this out to somebody early this morning, where apparently the ministry in Iran stated that the damage at best was minimal. The damage was minimal, not a lot. There was not a lot of damage. In fact, here we are. Yeah, the institute linked up. I'm just trying to open this up here. Mass casualties. Let me see if I can get this here. It's just so much of material that was going out. Let me try and find that. But I was informed that the damage, by the way, is very, very minimal. Very minimal. Firstly, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran had no nuclear weapons, and that whilst the 60% uranium was beyond what was needed, but it didn't pose a threat because Iran did not have nuclear weapons as such. And then the thing is that Iran was part and parcel of this deal way back in 2017. But then Trump basically stated that what happened, Trump stated, was that they foreclosed on that deal. They did away with it. And then, of course, that gave Iran the ability to continue with regards to the actual enrichment of uranium, which was not a threat as such. So here's the attacks that took place. By the way, I just want people to know, by the way, when you attack nuclear sites, you can cause potential radioactive contamination. You look at Fukushima, you look at the Chernobyl in Russia in '85, you can cause massive radioactive contamination. So what happens in such a situation? What happens there? So these are the sites, these are the areas, Fordo, Isfahan, and Natas. There's Tehran, somewhere there. So it's not too far. Isfahan's right somewhere in the south. So there were these 3 strikes. And then, of course, there's these other nuclear facilities. What's concerning is that there are some very close to Tehran. There's other places, Bandar, right down. So these are, so we are, from what I can gather, this strike that would basically happen was a violation of international law, a complete and utter violation. These were the bombs that were used, so people know and the penetration depth is 61 meters. Sometimes the penetration depth 1.8 to 2.4 meters. So it's not that significant. It's not that significant. And many experts have pointed out that this kind of sedimentary, these rocks there that are there would prevent this kind of penetration, and would not basically allow there would be a kind of a cushioning against this kind of blast wave. So from that perspective, it's highly unlikely that these kind of stealth bombers basically want or could have done any kind of damage, which means that this may continue, and this raises a disturbing precedent for further strikes by the United States, which we should all oppose. So here's the entrances to the underground facility. Here's the Fordo enrichment plant. Of course, you can see large hole visible along the ridge above the facility. Whether they penetrated, there's absolutely no basic proof that could have been done. In fact, the 2 Israeli officials, this was at odd because Trump, as usual, spoke about complete obliteration, complete destruction as usual, beating his chest. But 2 Israeli officials who spoke to the New York Times, and you check the New York Times report, stated that it is unlikely that these facilities would have been destroyed because they're deep down. Look how deep it is. So the bomb relies on the weight and velocity to penetrate the hardened surfaces. Here's a steel alloy, outer casing, that's designed to withstand the impact and the pressure. and this obviously depends. The smart fuse detonation base. So the bomber has to go. Has to go right through. Right, so that's the underground target. Whether it reached there, according to many reports, it's unlikely. It's unlikely, and no one is able to tell us on the impact of this. So, what was the purpose? What was the purpose of it? You see, the attack on Isfahan.
In reality, Yusuf, if you're saying these type of ammunitions cannot penetrate that particular depot, they will, I'm assuming, do a strike 2 and strike 3. They will continue to pound those locations. And
well, I don't know if they're coming back, because from their perspective, you see, I don't know if this was a PR exercise. This could have been a PR exercise. You really don't know. It's quite clear that Trump has been played, I mean, for the fool that he is. And I mean, he's certainly not a man of peace. He's a man of war. He's a narcissistic psychopath. We made this point clear. But whether you know, they clearly, I'll give you an example, right? How foolish this administration is. His intelligence secretary, Tulsi Gabbard, you remember in March he said that Iran has absolutely no nuclear capacity, no nuclear weapons, none of that. Did you remember? Do you remember her saying that? Did you remember her saying that? Do people remember her saying?
Of course. Even some of the international bodies have said that Iran are not making any type of nuclear weaponry.
So that was Tulsi Gabbard on nuclear threat of Iran. That the fact that in March it had no nuclear threat. Now, and I want you to share this to see what animalistic liars and thugs we are dealing with here. I want to share this so that maybe people didn't know or they missed this. Have a look at this just to see how people lie and they don't even make any kind of excuse about lying. She stated that there was absolutely no evidence that Iran could produce any nuclear weapon. This is March. So it's April, May, June, right? 3 months have passed. And she said they don't even have the capacity for that. Trump was asked, what about your intelligence head? She says they've got no nuclear weapons. They cannot produce. They don't have the capacity. They've got no capability. He said she was wrong. Well, now today, just a day ago, just yesterday, I want you to share this BBC report. Look what she says now. Look what Tulsi Gabbard says now. Can you see this? Now Iran can produce weapons within weeks. I mean, can you trust such people, such liars? The same woman who people and journalists, even someone like Galloway, for example, in his discussion with Morgan last week, pointed out that she stated that there's absolutely no capability that Iran could produce any kind of weapon. This is a total hoax. It's a lie. Now she says Iran could produce nuclear weapons within weeks, months after she testified that the country was not building them. So, and now she says that her statement that was mentioned in March was taken out of context. And a change of position came after Donald Trump said she was wrong, and that the intelligence showed Iran had a tremendous amount of material and could have material within months. So this is Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard. And this is Trump saying that she's no. This is last week. Listen to this. This is last week. If the BBC can play on this here, let's listen to this to get these ridiculous. Let's get to this here.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
Mr. President, did the Europeans help at all in talking with the Iranians?
No, they didn't help. No.
20.
So you see, he said she's wrong. He said she's wrong. And then on just a day before the strikes happened, which is this morning, yesterday, strikes happened early this morning. Yesterday, she says, no, it has. It's like, It's like now you see it, now you don't. Now you don't see it, next you do. And in the meantime, since the attacks by Israel have commenced last week, when was it? Last Friday, about 500 people, close to 500 people have basically died. Iran has, of course, retaliated, and rightly so, against a satanic regime. They've certainly come and basically done some sort of damage within Tel Aviv. But this just goes to show that these very people that you think you can trust now cannot trust. Now, who would have thought that the same woman who just about a month or two ago stated there's no weapons, now within weeks, Iran could produce weapons. Within weeks, Iran could produce weapons. I mean, this reminds me of something that I recall that was mentioned about 20 years ago. I don't know if we can even still see the story. If I can even get that particular article. The September dossier. Here's the report from George Washington University. I'm gonna share from the National Security Archive.
Sure. I'll be putting the link. I'll be putting the link in the chat shortly. If anybody wants to come on
that's fantastic.
And challenge Yusuf regarding the conflict, either in Iran or the conflict that's actually, or the genocide rather that's taking place.
I don't even know if there's people out there still supporting the genocide. I mean, are there people
there
out
are there has to be. There's still psychopathic.
Are there individuals that are here that are supporting the genocide?
Well, I'm going to put the link in the chat now.
Yeah, I'm going to put the link in the chat, and we'll deal with these thugs. But you remember this, Mohammed? If you can share this, you saw this. You remember this? This was in 2000. This was basically in. This was from the National Security Archive, and if you look at this year, prior to the invasion, they stated that Iraq was basically within 45 minutes of attacking any part of the world. So there was, and you remember Colin Powell's basic speech to the United Nations, where he basically presented a laborious kind of manufactured intelligence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And we now know that all of that was a lie. Every one of it was a lie. Everyone, it spoke about biological weapons. It spoke about the acquisition of uranium from Africa. I mean, this is the point. I don't know how many people we were still around, but I get to realize that there's a very younger, newer generation. I mean, some people that were about 4 or 5 years old during the Iraq War, they're probably now in their mid-20s, and they wouldn't have lived through what we saw and the lies and the deception. I don't know if you were there, but I believe, in fact, back then, Piers Morgan and the Daily Mirror, and we had the remarkable John Pulley. You had a 1 million man march on the streets of London. I don't know if you were around back then. And we saw these lies. So this is a playbook. What you're basically seeing here is essentially a playbook of what happened in Iraq, of what happened in Afghanistan, of what happened in Libya. The entire thing is a playbook. And for people to just come on board and say, look, I don't know, you made the point, one of the brothers supported, we need to support Israel. I mean, are we insane in our positions in this particular level to not see that this is part and parcel of a global, evil, satanic agenda, which is basically there to fulfill regime change?
What we're going to do, we got Anam waiting straight away. He's waiting backstage. I'm going to get Anam on. I'm not going to hesitate because time is
sure.
premium. So Anam, you'll be joining us now. Okay. Welcome to the show, Anam.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Alhamdulillah.
Walaikum salam.
Walaikum salam. It's good to see you again, Anam.
Yeah, you too. Well. You too. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing very good. All things considered. This is really spectacular because you were talking about 2005. I remember that's when Iran's nuclear program first came out. and we've been doing this for 20 years. And I never thought actually we'd get here because, we saw from the Iraq fiasco, invading Iraq was such a bad idea. You would really think that I really thought the US and Israel were both kind of like, look, wars have reactions. And so, and plus the way they built the Fordo facility in the mountains, you really, and then another thing I'll just say before I give my own opinion, I studied political science in college. So one of the things that we talk about in international relations is that nuclear technology is 60 years old, about as old as microwaves. So, this game that you play where every country only 5 countries are allowed nuclear weapons, except for the 3 that are unofficially allowed,
of course,
or 4 the unofficially allowed, So it's a strange thing to do to say to a country, you can't develop a technology that's already out there.
No, of course. And I think this is the whole point. And I think when we're talking about, in fact, from the Iranic point of view, if you look at the report by the advisor to the chairman of the Iranian parliament, Mahdi Mohammadi, he in fact stated that, and I think the news is just coming out now, that the US attack was not at all surprising and that no irreversible damage was sustained during the attack. In fact, he basically made the point that authorities as early as March had evacuated all the sites. Because if you look at the period, in March, April, roundabout dates, like as if Iran knew what was going to happen. There were several cargo trucks that were positioned along the access road to the facility's tunnel entrance. They were moved several kilometers away. So it's quite clear that if there was any damage done, it would be minimal at best. What is disturbing is that these attacks, which commenced particularly with Israel's attack, happened actually on the very day when there was a vote of no confidence against him. If you recall at the Knesset, where even members of the Orthodox
Shas party,
the Shas party, in fact, threatened that they were going to come out of the coalition. This happened, I think, was it about a week and a half ago, just on the very day when the attack happened. I think it was the morning of the Thursday before that. I just need to check up the article. And then at some point, the opposition lost because I think there was some sort of placating by the Likud party to the Orthodox. That the basic vote of no confidence was the fact that there's an increasing concern and suggestion that why is it that all the religious Orthodox Jews are exempted from the military, particularly in light of the genocide that happened over the past year. None of these Orthodox Jews are basically involved. And so the Shas party has been quite strong in opposition to any kind of military conscription on the basis that these individuals should be more involved in studying the scripture and shouldn't be involved in military conscription and joining the IDF. And of course, I think Trump himself, being a secularist, he's not a religious-minded Jew, but he's obviously formed coalition with the fanatics, was purportedly taking that position that they all should be conscripted. Of course, it sustained his war efforts. And so there was a vote of no confidence in relation to that. And of course, the Shas party didn't want to support him by virtue of the fact that there's an about position. And at the end, he gave in and acquiescence to this idea that for the time being, the religious ultra-Orthodox Jews will not be participating with the IDF in any kind of war. And then in the evening, you had the commencement of these attacks against Iran in Tehran and so on and so forth. So there are many factors. And from
he's
what
trying
I can
to keep
see,
this coalition together, which is
keep
insane.
The coalition together. It's also kind of a distraction because I think the Israeli community is getting more and more frustrated with Netanyahu the longer this is basically gone. When you've got two of the individuals, former prime ministers, Ehud Olmert and Barak, basically stating, although they were not saints themselves, but they basically stated, they've come short of saying it's a genocide, but they've stated that, look, war crimes have been committed and Netanyahu must go. And in fact, Olmert stated Netanyahu has to go to The Hague.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with your analysis. But could I suggest to you something about the Iran situation?
Sure.
I read an article. Iran has spent about $500 billion on its nuclear program, including the cost of sanctions and everything. So I think Iranians, this whole axis of resistance, they had spent so much money arming other people in other countries, to be their proxies. I am just of the opinion, though, that rather than spend all this money, Iran's a poor country. They could have been educating their people. I think this whole nuclear program was a folly, and we see that today.
I disagree because you can spend money on the people, but when you are going to be attacked, your country will be taken over very swiftly if you don't have got any weapons of self-defense. It's like the situation in people of Palestine, of course, Gaza. They had no options but to make themselves some shelters, some bunkers. You watch the bunkers in Tel Aviv; they are like hotel rooms. They are fully equipped with so much items and power and so forth. So when they kind of blame the Palestinians for spending so much money on tunnels, on bunkers and so forth, but when you see the hypocrisy of the people in Israel, and of course Israel have got nuclear weapons, this is what everybody seems to forget, that Israel have got nuclear weapons and they are, kept quiet about it. No international body is allowed to go to look and check their facilities, and everything seems to be brushed under the carpet. But joining us right now, we've got America. As you can see, Brother Yusuf, we've got Michael.
I just want to share this before we go to our good friend from
from
the United States. I forget his name.
Mike.
He calls himself, Mike Manson. I mean, talking about chemical weapons and talking about biological weapons. This is a report by Avner Cohen, and this dates back to the utilization of biological weapons as early as 1948. This is Avner Cohen, who's the senior fellow at the International Security Studies at Maryland, and he's the author of Israel and the Bomb, that's published by Columbia University Press. He basically pointed out that in 1948, Israel's founding father and prime minister wrote a letter to Ehud Avriel, one of the Jewish agency's operatives, ordering to seek out and recruit East Jewish scientists who could either increase the capacity to kill masses or cure masses. Both are important. And they recruited a 30-year-old epidemiologist and colonel in the Red Army named Avraham Marcus Klingberg. In that time, Klingberg became one of Israel's leading scientists in the area of chemical and biological weapons. We're not just talking about nuclear weapons. We're talking about biological weapons as early as 1948. This has also been mentioned by Benny Morris, the pro-Israeli historian, in his book. I think one of the earlier books, I can't get the name, and I even saw the article. But the point I'm making from this is that Israel was experimenting not just with nuclear weapons, but with biological weapons as early as 1948. 1948. To this day, the Israeli government has issued no policy statement on biological arms control, and it has neither signed nor ratified the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention. In my opinion, biological warfare is potentially even more dangerous and more deadlier than nuclear weaponry. I mean, nuclear weaponry, there's a nuke. You blow it up, you can actually see it. Biological weaponry, and many people toy, and I need to be careful what I say because we've got struck for
the same thing with gas and chemical weapons. It doesn't discriminate, so if the wind blows the other way, it goes back on your own forces.
Well, that's the whole point. But with biological weapons, for example, it could be used specifically. You could use it in vaccination programs, and I believe Israel has. The idea where you want to seek scientists out to increase the capacity to kill masses as early as 1948 and showing an interest in biological warfare in a general sense as a kind of a non-conventional approach in forms of warfare, raises the point in the argument that ideologically you're dealing with a community and a state which is highly, highly problematic. Have a look at this article. This is about a 27-page article by Avner Cohen, and it's backed up. It's a journal article published at the University of Maryland, and this guy is the senior fellow at the Center for International and Security Studies at the university. I believe this was way back in 2001 when this article was in fact written down. But it just goes to show that I'm all for nuclear proliferation. I support the idea that almost every single state on earth should basically sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Agreement. But within the context of the Middle East, if Iran has to disband its nuclear enrichment program, and now by the looks of it, since the attack happened, we're talking about Iran potentially developing a bomb in 5 to 10 years from now. They're going to increase. If there's very little damage done at these 3 sites, they're going to inevitably and invariably accelerate their program. So I'm all for Iran putting aside and ending its nuclear enrichment program if it's 60% is too dangerous. But then at the same time, Israel has to end its nuclear program. I mean, you look at the state of Israel and you look at Israel's nukes. How many nukes does Israel have? If we look at the nuclear
90
weapons facility of Israel, it's believed to have something like between 90 to 400 nuclear warheads. That's more than the United Kingdom. I mean, the United Kingdom is also a nuclear power. It's got these kind of, I think, ballistic missiles in certain parts of the sea. But Israel, as a small, tiny nation state, which is smaller than one of the Kruger National Park here in South Africa, is estimated to have something like 400 nuclear warheads. And they are supposed to have the most sophisticated kind of, submarine-launched cruise missiles, long intercontinental ballistic missiles. So if Israel has this, and if Israel basically is maintaining a position of deliberate ambiguity, because from the official narrative in the media, they're presenting a policy of deliberate ambiguity. They won't admit it. They won't deny it. If you look at all these particular spokespeople that have come over the past year, Elon Levy, he's now fired, and David Mensa, and you have this lawyer from the United Kingdom for Israel, Natasha Houtzman. They were questioned point blank, does Israel have nuclear weapons? It's quite clear. It's like an unwritten secret that it does. But they've always perpetually maintained a form of deliberate ambiguity, and nobody holds them to account. Nobody holds them to account. You recall in November 2023, the health minister, the junior health minister, and we pointed out, Amihai Eliyahu, he stated it's about time that Israel drops a nuclear bomb over Gaza. Now, if you're making that mention, if you're mentioning dropping a nuclear bomb in Gaza, obviously it's going to impact, he's an idiot because it will blow back and impact Tel Aviv and Israel itself. But if you're talking about dropping a nuclear bomb in Gaza as early as November 2023 at the commencement of the genocide, then that's essentially a tacit admission on the part of Israel that it does in fact possess that nuclear capability. So look at the facts. Iran has signed the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Israel has not signed the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Iran does not have nuclear weapons. This is confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, but it has increased its enrichment of uranium to approximately 60%, which they state is a form of concern because you don't need that much of uranium for purposes of electricity or for civilian purposes and so on. Israel, on the other hand, doesn't just have uranium, but it has, according to records, 400 nuclear warheads. I had a
But Yusuf, you got to understand also they actually stole that information. The blueprint for nuclear weapons was stolen by Mossad from, I think it was in America or Britain, one of the countries.
France.
The BRICS, yeah. They actually stole the information from the BRICS so they can build their own nuclear warheads and so forth. Thank you, Anna. You're right in that.
But that's the whole point. But I just want to add one other thing before we go. This that Israel has what they call the Samson option. And I don't know if you mentioned this in the past, but the Samson option is a strategy of massive retaliation with nuclear weapons as a last resort, as a last kind of resort against a country whose military has invaded you. Now, you'd only have a Samson option. They call it the Samson option. Like, for example, when they have Palestinians as human shields, they call it the mosquito protocol. This is official doctrine. So the Samson option is there. It's an official policy, but that policy can only exist if you have nuclear weapons. From the commencement of 1948, the talk goes that with French cooperation, the development of this nuclear research center in Negev, way back during the time of Oppenheimer and Einstein and a lot of those individuals. And by the way, the very first time this came into cognizance was when a nuclear scientist by the name of Mordecai Vanunu. Let me tell you this, and I'm going to try and see if I can share the email. I had an email communication, believe it or not, with Mordecai Vanunu, because there was an individual on Facebook, on my Facebook, which is now basically blocked. I can't access Facebook, called Mordecai Vanunu. He was a technician formerly employed at the Negev Nuclear Research Center. I don't think he was a nuclear scientist, but he was a technician. He then basically started sharing nuclear secrets with journalists in the United Kingdom. He shared it with, I think, outlets like The Guardian and the Daily Mirror. He was in Europe for a short particular period of time. Vanunu was then kidnapped by Mossad and brought back to Israel, where he was sentenced for about 18 years for purported treason and some sort of kind of incitement against the state. Now, the point I'm basically mentioning from this, I asked him for an interview via email. I'm going to just get that email and share it if I can, so you will see. And obviously he's in Israel proper. He's no longer in incarceration. He's fully retired, but he doesn't talk. But he was one of the key individuals that blew apart this idea that Israel had a fully fledged existing nuclear research center and that they had nuclear bombs and they had nukes and that they were available to engage in any kind of warfare at any given option. And this was in the early 80s when it basically.
But why do you do that? Why do you do that, Yusuf? We've got Mike and we've got Brother Mustafa.
Yeah, let Mike. Is there anything you want to say, Mike? How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well, gentlemen. How are you all?
Good.
All good.
I was going to mention the Samson option, but you obviously just did. I'm sure most of the Muslims know the Old Testament story of Samson. He was really strong until Delilah.
The first
suicide bomber,
suicide,
the first suicide killer.
Right.
Yeah.
He brought the temple down on himself after Delilah cut his hair and they gouged his eyes out.
He was also a womanizer as well.
He was. And he killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they have all that going in the
10,000.
But by the way, Mike, just so that people know, because I've been having a conversation with one of my neighbors recently, and they have this idea that the ancient Philistines are the Palestinians. The Philistines and the Palestinians are ethnically different in the same fashion that the ancient Israelites and the modern day Israelis are totally ethnically different. They're not the same. So that's just to put it out there for the record.
Right.
That,
if I remember correctly, I think Philistine was Hebrew for seafarers, that they came up from the Red Sea, that the Philistines. But anyways, we don't want to get too ancient on everything.
We don't get bogged down too much into that.
Right.
But any comments you want to make on what your psychotic president is doing now?
Yeah.
Is he not fulfilling what Wesley Clark was saying some more than 20 years ago?
Well, I remember when Wesley Clark was the head of NATO, and right? Wasn't he the supreme ruler?
He was the head of NATO, and I think way back in 2003.
He ran for president at one point as a Democrat. But,
well, yeah, that's true. But
he was supreme military commander during the Bosnia
Wesley Clark stated that the White House had devised a plan after the 9/11 attacks to attack 7 majority Muslim countries. You know which are 7 majority Muslim countries? Syria,
Iran,
Libya, Somalia, Sudan,
Iraq.
Right.
Iran.
Cheney and Rumsfeld had a whole big plan going.
There was an organization called the Project for the New American Century. It was, that's another discussion on its own. Those who are familiar with the Project for the New American Century, but it appears to me that almost every single country that was outlined by this military officer that Wesley Clark had met in November 2001 Almost all the countries have now been attacked. All of them. Libya has been destroyed. Syria, totally taken out. Iraq, taken out. Somalia, of course, you had the Black Hawk down, but that was before 2001. Sudan, you can see what's going on in Sudan. And now, of course, Iran. So those allegations basically appeared in the, he published a book called the Clark Critique. And he stated that basically that idea was mooted around, even initially, because Saddam Hussein at that particular point in time was viewed as someone they wanted to get rid of, even though there was no evidence of Iraqi sponsorship. I mean, they even tried to link up Saddam Hussein with 9/11. They tried to say that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. They accused Saddam of being involved in being the real source of terrorists, that he was basically the great demon in the entire world. And what did Trump say just yesterday? Besides basically talking about the so-called nuclear threat, he basically made the point that Iran is a global supporter of terrorism. So it seems that as this well-known Marwan Bashara on Al Jazeera said a couple of days ago, he says that it seems that every few decades there is a new bogeyman that has to be invented by the Americans. And in this instance here, it's quite clear that the attack on Iran was done with full American support. The attack by Israel was done with full American support. I mean, yes, go ahead, Mohammed.
Sorry, if I could, you said at the beginning about how Israel's nuclear program, there's a hypocrisy involved, right? When you say, Iran deserves to be bombed because they have a nuclear program, but Israel has anywhere from 90 to 400 nukes. And somehow that's okay. Are we going to have a non-proliferation treaty, or are we going to have a non-proliferation treaty?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I'd like to get Brother Mustafa involved.
Yes.
I'm sorry, and I'm been waiting patiently. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Mustafa.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Greetings to Brother Muhammad and to all the Muslims on the panel. And hi to the non-Muslims as well. Yeah, so just generally observing, I just want to bring a slight slant on it. I just want to get people's opinions. There's a common Sunni Muslim understanding, because a lot of the Muslim understanding of the events that are occurring is in regards to future eschatological issues which are to develop. So just for our non-Muslims in the audience, there's a strong belief that the events which we are seeing unfold is events which are taking place in the precipice before the return of Christ. So the understanding, therefore, amongst many Sunni Muslims, which may intrigue our non-Muslim panelists here, is that Iran and Israel are in fact in cahoots with each other. I'm sure brothers are familiar with this particular understanding, although from what we gather from the events taking place, that is incomprehensible. However, there is a strong opinion amongst Muslims in general, and the Sunni Muslims, who are the majority, in that they believe that this is an attempt to make a greater Israel in presence. So, according to the Islamic eschatology, there is a belief that there is an antichrist figure, which our atheist friend here, who was, I think, once upon a time a Christian, should need to reflect upon. And this antichrist figure emanates from this particular area. I think it's from the area of Isfahan in Iran. In and around that. So this antichrist figure particularly will emerge, and the system in place is actually a precipice in readiness for his return. So whilst Israel and Iran are fighting each other, they're doing it for a particular purpose, which it allows Israel to become more expansionist. So they've got proxy government in place in Syria at the moment. With a new head of state of there, who I believe had close connections with ISIS, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I just want to get the opinions of the panelists here, perhaps with Brother Yusuf first of all, just to get an indication as to, do you believe there is some sort, and it may sound conspiratorial, but as I said, lots of Muslims are of this opinion that this is Israel, Iran incidents that we're seeing is in fact a camouflage as to events which are to unfold, in that Israel will become more expansionist. We can see where perhaps Iran will in due course be overtaken as well. America's already got its military bases in Syria, in Jordan, in Iraq, and our next step would be Iran. So do you believe it's conceivable that Iran and Israel are in cahoots with each other in regards to these future eschatological matters to happen, and therefore also dragging the Arab nations into the war and decimating the Arab nations as well? Just want to get your opinion on that, Brother Yusuf.
I'm very, very intrigued, Brother Mustafa,
Thank-
and I'm everybody. Brother Yusuf, I was totally caught off guard there with Brother Mustafa's statement regarding Khorasan. He is 100% correct. The prophecy of the Antichrist is from Persia, the Middle Persia, which is Iran, Eastern Iran. I'm taken back by that, Brother Mustafa. MashaAllah, barakallah feekum. It's called Khorasan. Interesting.
Thanks, Brother Mustafa. And I think it's been some time since we last spoke. You were quite a regular on this platform, and I think that the one thing that I think it was you that had that phenomenal discussion with that chap from Rebel Media. Was it Rebel Media, the guy who was then eventually arrested?
Yeah, that's
Canada?
right. Ezra Levant, the Canadian.
I really enjoyed that, and I think one of the first times I came on Muhammad's program, I think you were with us, and then I think subsequently you were involved in other things. But it's good to have you. Firstly, I just want to make this point, and Muhammad would know this, that I have for a number of years kind of delved into discussions on religion, and of course comparative religion and discussions in the Quran from an apologetic perspective, and then of course discussions on contemporary political issues. I kind of tend to stay away from discussions on eschatological work material. And the one guy, the one kind of individual that's a kind of a global proponent of this, or at least he's been also quite controversial, is someone called Imran Nazar Hussain, who was in South Africa recently, by the way. You probably heard of him, but he's got a totally different perspective and quite a few controversial issues, I would say. And again, I'm not an expert. I'm not a scholar. I'm not even a political scholar for that particular matter, but I'm let alone an Islamic scholar. But I would basically say this point, that what you are talking about, what you seem to be discussing, is not so much eschatology, more particularly something which we could describe as purported apocalyptic writings. Why I say this is that in terms of the end time, this idea of the return of Isa and the coming of the Mahdi and so on and so forth, there doesn't appear to be, and you tell me if I'm wrong, and Anam and some of the other brothers, there doesn't appear to be any kind of universally accepted apocalyptic tradition, either amongst both Sunnis and Shias. And why I say this is because at the outset, the Quran is not an apocalyptic work. It's obviously, the Quran concerns itself about the impending day of judgment. It leaves, in a sense, from what I can gather, and I'm just talking from the Quranic point of view, no room for the idea or the existence of apocalyptic events in the future. So apocalyptic narratives, developed and were in fact developed within the Islamic scholarly tradition. But in many instances, you find that a lot of this literature and a lot of what you mentioned, of course, even in terms of the coming of Isa alayhi salam and the Mahdi and so on. I mean, there's one verse in the Quran, just off memory, وَإِنَّهُ لَعِلْمٌ لِلسَّاعَةِ فَلَا تَمْتَرُنَّ بِهَا وَاتَّبِعُونَ. I don't want to go into the exegesis of the Quran, but some would say that the sign of the coming of the last hour, this would be the sign of the coming of the last hour. Some of the classical exegetes state that is the advent of the coming of Jesus. People like Muhammad Asad and others would say that is not reference to Christ, it's a reference to the divine writ, the Quran itself. The problem that I've got is a lot of the apocalyptic literature that you see out there, they barely cite Quranic passages. They seem to paraphrase the scripture. And if you look at, for example, people like Al-Ghazali, Ibn Arabi, Qurtubi, even Ibn Kathir and Suyuti in his writings, they mention a large proportion and they apportion varied forms of meanings in terms of the end times, or what we would call the apocalypse, because that's what we're talking about, the end time where you've got the return of Christ and so on and so forth. For example, at the time of the Mongol conquest, Ibn Kathir, and just you can find it, he identified the Ya'juj and Ma'juj with the Turks and the Mongols. Now, of course, we know that's not correct. And then, of course, if you look at some of the other writers,
for some context, in 1258, the Mongols sacked Baghdad,
yeah,
and that was the capital of the Islamic Empire. So, and we lost a library. It was a calamity in geopolitical terms to see like the hordes destroying civilization. But sorry, go ahead, brother. It seems like the world is ending.
But that's what I'm saying, and I don't want to kind of bandy around too much on this because I'm by no means an expert. But what it appears to me is that within the Islamic scholarly tradition, there's never been any kind of contender. So I'll give you one example, a practical example. In 2000, I think in the year 2000, when Ariel Sharon entered Masjid al-Aqsa, I was a young kid. I was at a masjid back then. And we had an imam. I think he was from the United Kingdom. And he came and he said that that particular entry in Masjid al-Aqsa by Ariel Sharon is mentioned in the Quran. So I thought to myself, where is this mentioned? I mean, where do you have, how do you basically even draw this kind of parallels? And then he gives a quotation. He says, وَقَضَيْنَا إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي الْكِتَابِ لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا, that we warned the children of Israel that you will cause corruption in the land twice and you will become arrogant twice. And so he says now somehow or the other, by some form of twisting, that when we permitted your enemies to enter your mosque and to desecrate it in the Surah Bani Israel, that is now a foretelling of the coming of Ariel Sharon. Now, I found that as a kid problematic. I mean, that's insane to even make that kind of I mean, it's not. I'm not trying to draw the analogy with Brother Mustafa, which is raising some interesting points. But I'm saying is that is the kind of potential dark path or sinister road that you're going to go if we basically adopt these particular positions.
You see, the difference. Sorry to interrupt you, but the difference there that is just some sort of erroneous interpretation. However, in terms of the precedent before the return of Christ, I mean, that's very much attested in the Hadith corpus. So in terms of Ariel Sharon, I mean, that's just some sort of
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a wild interpretation. But in terms of this understanding, you see, because our friends here may find it bizarre that Muslims are speaking about eschatological events when we've got more pressing things are taking place, and what is the solution to this. However, you see, for people who want to consider this, because Muslims have the firm belief that the state of Israel is in fact a state which is the antithesis of what God wants us to live our lives as people who adhere to the commandments of God. So that although Israel would be deemed as the holy land in which Christ will return, and according to the biblical narrative, or the Christian Judaic narrative, or Christian rather, should I say, narrative, in which he will fight the enemies of Israel, which seems to be a bit paradoxical. For why would Jesus fight for the establishment of a secular state which is contrary to the law of God, as pertained in the Israel, according to the way Israel runs its day-to-day affairs, in terms of being a secular state, in effect, the accentuators of LGBTQ, feminism, and atheism, which is the de facto position of the majority of the inhabitants of Israel, although they go by the proxy of being Jews, but in fact we do know they are secularists, and majority, I would say, of people of Israelis, they're probably atheists. But the point being is, this is very fundamental, and this is uppermost on a lot of people's minds as they observe the events unfolding. Some people may be of the opinion that it's somewhat conspiratorial, but I was speaking to, in fact, on the TikTok live with this particular individual, and he was of the opinion that this is a game between Israel and Iran, in which they both bomb each other, flatten each other, I raise an objection. Why would Israel, if it's the antithesis, allow self-destruction to take place from its own domain? But he said it's being done for the wider purpose of a greater Israel, and they've got the quick ability to rebuild whatever damage that they've encountered in Israel. And hence, when it comes to these matters, because this is a very, very fundamental point that is something that non-Muslims in particular, and Muslims of course, need to realize, that these events to occur are ordained. They are going to happen. So this is something I thought I'd just bring that into the equation and why these events are occurring. You see, so.
Thanks. And I want to continue this conversation. I just want to make the point. I disagree with the idea that Israel and Iran are working in cahoots with each other. Now, let me just qualify that point, because has Israel at any stage ever supported Iran? And historically, the answer is yet. Not only before the revolution, but even after the revolution. For example, if you look at the Iran-Iraq war, Israel was one of the main suppliers of military equipment to Iran during the Iran-Iraq war. And this was after the revolution. And they gave them intelligence too. Yeah, they gave them, they also provided military instructions during the war. And this is after, this idea that Israel presents that it's only after 79 that the hostility began between Israel and Iran. But even after 79, in 80, I think 81, when you had the bombing of the Osrak nuclear reactor in Iraq, it was Iranian intelligence that basically assisted Israel to carry out that particular attack.
Even though the perception was that the West was supporting Iraq in the war against Iran, yet Israel was tipping off Iran.
And in Iran and the United States during what they would call known as the Iran-Contra scandal, basically there were the arms sales. So the Israeli arms sales was also facilitated to Iran at that particular time, and also from Iran to Israel and the United States. So this was done clandestine. I don't deny that happened, but I think in the context of what is happening now at this particular juncture, it seems to be a bit of a stretch to suggest that the regime in Tehran and the Netanyahu regime is somehow or the other clandestinely working together. I mean, I don't see any evidence for that. I don't see any kind of logic. Of course, I mean, you've got Mossad intelligence operatives that are fully existent in Tehran, throughout Iran. There's no doubt, and they may possibly have been part and parcel of the apparatus of the Iranian establishment. They're probably there. But I don't think at the highest level, there's that level of complicity between the parties.
So how sorry to interrupt, but how then can they, how can they basically kill the leaders of the military, for example, at a free whim? It's like they know every movement. So it suggests that there is some sort of conformity between the two, in which there's also some sort of pushback from the Iranian regime in terms of the closeness, the clandestine closeness that Iran and Israel have. Yet there is that overarching element which is also in support of the complicity between Israel and Iran. So it seems to me there's two factions that work in Iran, and it's very interesting to note that Israel has so much bases, and it's apparently at these secret bases in Iran for decades, which is a bit bizarre.
I think I mean, they did the same with Ismail Haniyeh when they targeted him. I don't in any way believe that. I mean, they wanted to get rid of Haniyeh for a long time. It's quite clear that they've got a powerful strategic ability to target individuals, like they did with Hezbollah with the so-called the attacks with the mobiles, with these devices that they had in their hands. And they've got that ability and capability to do that. But I don't think that is now because of some sort of support at a highest level. I mean, why would the Iranian regime want their own nuclear scientists to be killed?
How would all their generals, all their Revolutionary Guard commanders,
how would it serve them? How would it benefit them? And why would Khamenei? Why would he want that? Is Khamenei now working with Netanyahu behind the scenes?
So this is to answer that particular point. As I said, there's two factions within Iran. one of the factions are pushing back against Israeli complicity, but there is another faction which is complicit with Israel. You see, it's like it's like they're pushing back against each other. The fact that Israel can then, which we've already retrospectively accepted, that they seem to have bases in Iran. But if the establishment at the higher echelons is aware, why haven't they done away with these secret in a Mossad, which is infiltrated Iran? Why haven't they done away with it if it's so apparent? So it does seem to me there's like a faction taking place which is trying to unite with Israel, and at the same juncture there are those which are trying to push back against Israel. In terms of the nuclear, it has been noted, however, that Iran has taken out most of its uranium from the various reactors. So whatever
but the point is, though, if you don't have spinning centrifuges, you can't get to 99% that you need to build.
Yeah, but these were old. These were very much old. They were Russian made from I think the late 80s. So they're not really operational as they once upon a time were. This was just a camouflage again. And Iran's actually got other bases which America have seemed to have bombed. But they think they've achieved a great victory. But Iran has taken all of its uranium out, and it's got more up-to-date centrifuge, which I think have been provided by China. And then, so they're going to be, making the necessary plutonium along with the uranium to still continue with their plot. Notice they've done the main thing, which is to take the uranium out. It's just a matter of upgrading to the higher centrifuges, which China have been giving them. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but it's quite clear that.
May I interject?
Who's that? Is that Brother Anam? You want to say something?
That's Brother Hassan. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Hassan.
Yeah, I just want to make one point before it comes in. That the Israeli position at this particular point in time is that they are portraying the Revolutionary Guard councils not as defenders but as oppressors of the people. So it's quite clear that they would like someone like the Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, to basically become the head of the regime. And that narrative has been expressed. It's quite clear from what I can see that this is basically an attempt for regime change, and of course a distraction in terms of what's happening in Gaza. But what may have happened is that the strategy that Israel is engaged in may have probably produced the opposite effect, because right now what it seems to be is that there seems to be, and I've seen this in Middle East, even on the streets of London, there appears to have been some sort of consolidated public sentiment amongst Iranians across all political lines. So many Iranians, for example, who have been long-term critics of the regime, and they're secular by nature, they've expressed anger, quite strangely enough, about what they perceive as a foreign assault on national sovereignty. So the collective memory in the Iranian people's minds is similar to what happened in 1953, when where the CIA-backed coup, where they then introduced the Shah, and that caused decades of oppression in Iranian society. Most Iranians don't want the Shah back. They don't want Reza Pahlavi back. This attack on them hasn't basically created an impetus to say, look, this is an opportunity for us to get rid of the regime. Rather, it's consolidated their support amongst each other. So you've got the conservatives on the one hand, the religiously minded and the secular, both expressing total condemnation towards the United States and, of course, the Israeli state, and many of them seeing it for what it is, a distraction for the genocide in Gaza that's basically happening, an attempt for regime change, and, of course, the idea of weapons of mass destruction is just simply a weapon of mass destruction, and it's the Iraq 101 playbook all over again. I see this more particularly, if you want to talk about a conspiracy, I see this more particularly in line with the document that was produced by the group called the Project for the New American Century, where they produced a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, and what Wesley Clark alluded to, and we had people like Richard Pearl and Dick Cheney and all these neocons and hawks,
Council on Foreign Relations.
That the aim is now to obliterate, either through cyberspace or physically, all these particular countries, so that the deeper aim is to, for example, control or have better access to the Caspian region. Because once you have a compliant regime in Iran, it also allows you to have access to wealth. I mean, look at the article by Felicity Arbuthnot. In 2008, for Global Research, she was already writing the point that if Iraq and Iran are controlled by the West, essentially it opens up the gateway and the doorway to Central Asia and the
brother, if I could suggest quickly and then introduce the guest Hassan.
Okay.
Thank you. So the thing is, though, I feel like I heard something. It sounds about right. Only 20% of the population of Iran actually supports the regime. I don't think regime collapse is a good thing, but I think since 1979, since we discussed the war and stuff. But let me pause there.
Well, that may be so, and I mean, let me tell you something. And in the entire Middle East, how many of the people in Saudi, in Qatar, in the Emirati, how many of them support the respective regimes? I mean, there's dissatisfaction.
That's true, but you know, most of those 40-year-old dictators have been gone. And Khamenei's been around since '89, you know, so it's 36 years counting.
No, I don't know about the fact
kind of
that, there's this figure. I've seen it according to Middle East Institute, but I'm not so sure that there's a kind of an established figure to say only 20% support the Iranian regime. I mean, on the streets of London, you had secular Iranians who are by no means religious, some of them atheists, some of them agnostics, and by no means they would be supportive of the idea of an Islamic state as such. But all of them are fully consolidated with their opposition to the state of Israel, and of course to the United States attack, because it just simply reignites something which is in living memory of, I assume, a lot of us that were around during the 2003 Iraq War. And when you see the same comments, the same ideas, the same kind of talking points that are being made by Trump, which was made by his predecessors and George W. Bush and so on. It's like history repeats itself and people don't basically learn. And this is what we see by these pundits and these media outlets and so on. So if I talk about a conspiracy, and I appreciate Brother Mustafa's...
Brother Yusuf, can we just pause on that and listen, get a word from Brother Hassan, who's been patiently waiting, and then we get back to this.
Go ahead, Brother Hassan.
Hassan, assalamu alaikum. Sorry for keeping you waiting, brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. No problem at all. Just to put this into perspective, as far as Iran is concerned, their history with Israel, whether we be talking about this century or previous centuries, has been well, topsy-turvy to say the least. And in the last, just putting this out there, in the last 2 decades alone, the entirety of their relationship has been more or less staying out of each other's business until very recently, in the last 5 years, if one notices a pattern here. The fact of the matter is that the current regime of Iran, it did not matter to Israel for a long time. It hasn't mattered to Israel for a long time. It matters only now because there's a vested interest for Israel to take charge, to take what they can out of this region. Now, this may sound a bit vague, this may sound a bit indirect, but the fact of the matter is this particular conflict, if that's what you want to call it, was coming. For anyone who was paying attention, it was coming. I'm surprised that people are surprised, because ultimately, as you mentioned, the Clark critique, I had the displeasure of having a go through it. The fact of the matter is, whether you take that as relevant or not in this case, either way you can pinpoint, because of how Iran is situated. It is basically, in a sense, a gateway into Central Asia, as you mentioned. The fact of the matter is, there are other ways to get around it. Through Iran, it just makes it a little more convenient, and that's why, yeah, exactly. So, and that's why it's logistically more feasible for Israel, or for that matter, any other country around the side of Asham, to attack Iran. Whether Israel did this beforehand or in the future would not matter. Iran was always going to be a target, no matter what regime.
I agree with that, Brother Hassan. I just want to add to what you're saying, that whether we agree with it or not, whether we believe it's true or not, but at least from the outside observer, the current government in Iran I don't think much about the present president. I mean, besides Ahmadinejad, who appeared to be somewhat of kind of substance, but the current government does not recognize Israel's legitimacy as a state. I don't know if it's called openly for its destruction, although there's been particular views whether it's empty rhetoric and so on. But Iran is one of the few major players in that particular region that has viewed Palestine as the sole kind of legitimate government of the historic Palestinian territories, and it in fact calls and regards Israel as illegitimate. A lot of the other Arab states in that particular region are kind of taking a kind of a far more a position of acquiescence. Obviously, they're not openly saying it, but it appears to me it's somewhat more subdued as opposed to the Iranian position, at least at the public level. And the other point is this: is that the only time there was some sort of cordial relationship between Iran and Israel was during the heights of the Cold War. But that was when the Shah of Iran, after the coup in 1953, when he became instated, then somehow or the other there was some sort of cooling relationship existing between the two parties. But Iran was one of the first countries, even in 1947, when at the United Nations partition plan, which Israel, of course, did not even accept in the end, they were one of the 13 countries that voted against that. So it's clear that that from the inception of the State of Israel, there has been this kind of problematic relationship between the particular scenarios. And whether you agree with it or not, from 1985, or at least from the Lebanon War in the 80s till presently, there has been somewhat of a kind of a proxy conflict between Iran and Israel. So all these movements, Hezbollah, whether it's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Palestine, or Hamas, or the Houthis, at some level, there would have been some sort of proxy relationship. Now, do I believe, as the United States and Israel would want to believe, that there was some sort of direct command responsibility with Iran and Hamas, and Iran and the Houthis, and Iran and Islamic Jihad? The answer to that is, of course, no. Most of these groups operated independently, but there was some sort of symbolic support and, of course, some form of monetary support at some level. And this obviously leads to some sort of direct military confrontation. So whether this will lead to the eventual Armageddon, this is the problem. And again, it's a fascinating discussion what Brother Mustafa introduced here. And maybe we should have a program with people far more better qualified than myself. We don't go down that particular route. But it's quite fascinating to note that the Christian Zionists, and Mike would probably know this, the Christian Zionists at this point in time, and you just listen to the discussion of Franklin Graham. He was interviewed by Piers Morgan, I think sometime last week, that they are itching for this kind of conflagration somehow or the other, where the entire Middle East erupts into some sort of fire and essentially basically leads to this potential so-called bloody Armageddon, which then rise to the second coming of Christ. And what is also surprising to me, and Mustafa has had probably some interactions with these characters in Hyde Park and Brother Muhammad as well, is that these views are not just coming now from the traditional far-right Zionists like John Hagee and some of these Pentecostal fanatics, or some of these extreme factions amongst Christian right-wing fundamentalists. But I see now this particular position by even those missionaries that have traditionally taken a kind of a more pacifistic approach when it comes to political issues, and have been primarily involved just simply in polemics against Muslims or at a theological level. I mean, look at this character here. What's his name? Wood, David Wood. You guys have had interaction. We've had interaction with him over the years. See his programs now that he has online. They're openly supporting genocide. They're openly becoming apologists for genocide. They're openly supporting an invasion of Iran, which is illegal even in terms of international law. This kind of aggressive military expansionist approach is something that we are seeing new in missionary tautology circles. And this begs the question, why? Because during the Iraq War of 2003, during, I believe, I was much younger in the first Iraq War, you had a lot of missionary outfits engaging in missionary activity towards Muslims. And the positions that they adopted was something inherently apolitical. So, for example, when I met Jay Smith years back in South Africa, he told me, well, he's a Mennonite. He leaves the politics of politicians. He's a pacifist by nature. They believe in the brethren in Christ. But look at his positions recently in his interviews with another Saudi stooge by the name of Al-Fadi, a so-called Saudi Christian. Look at the discussion that they are basically having. They're speaking in terms which are imperialist, militaristic terms, which is unheard of in missionary tautology circles in the past. And so this, for me, raises a kind of a unique scenario for us as Muslims, in the sense that I think from the Christian position now, their position has they've undermined their position. When you start openly supporting the Israeli genocide, as a lot of these traditional missionaries who are not involved in political discussions are doing now, if a lot of them are supporting invading other countries boldly, so it's not just the far-right Christian Zionists, but even those that have been involved in Muslim-Christian debate are supporting this openly and on their platforms and podcasts, I think this basically shows a shift in terms of opinion. And I don't know, maybe perhaps they also kind of appeal to this so-called apocalyptic idea of the...
Sorry to interrupt you, brother Yusuf, but just to substantiate, I mean, here in the UK, where me and brother Muhammad, I mean, the increase or the propagation of Islam is going to up to another level altogether, you see. Yeah. So, I mean, you probably see on various platforms that we feature on. Yes. And, you know, Islam is really on the rise in the UK exponentially, in addition to the fact that there are many, many Muslims who live in the UK, much more than per ratio compared to America, as an example. But the point is, I think in terms of this evangelical movement, I mean, they are so besotted by the return of Christ that they believe that Israel, that the Jews must be in Zion in order to perpetuate that. So if Americans are left scratching their head as to why our governments, particularly American governments, support Israel to the hilt, no matter what, and no matter what it does, that's the real reasoning behind it. Is this perverted belief where they believe in, you know, the return of Christ, and all mankind should worship him. And, you know, there are so many organizations, evangelical organizations, which try to reach out to people of other faiths, in particular the Muslims, who they see as competitors in the world of missionary work, people trying to, you know, inculcate their masses towards their particular way of religion, whether that's Christianity or Islam. So as a result, you're quite correct. Someone like Jay Smith, who I debated at Speaker's Corner a good 15 years ago, this was before the time of YouTube. So yeah, they're taking a much more, shall we just say, aggressive tone now, and are complementing their beliefs that, you know, there should be much more of a firm action done, not just for the sake of polemics, but also for this evangelizing. And that's a very crucial point to observe, which I think our American guests can reflect upon.
Absolutely. I just want to echo something that Brother Yusuf said regarding the interview with Piers Morgan with the religious fanatic, the Christian individual who is actually boasting and saying, look, you know, these things have to be done. The war in Iran and these conflicts have to be done for the second coming of Jesus, peace be upon him. And he's trying to put something onto the Iran because they're trying to say that Iran is also trying to speed up this kind of like ideology. But also, I want to mention what Mustafa said regarding the effects of Islam in the UK. Every major city and town has a dawah stall. Just here in Coventry alone, on Saturday, we had 6 people take the Shahada. 6 people in one day in Coventry. And this is not, you know, being forceful on people. Individuals are coming over to us and speaking to us and asking the question and having an open mind, and then, of course, accepting Islam. So I think this aspect is very scary to the people who dislike Islam, where you have other Christian stores, such as the JWs, or another group of Christians who walk up and down shouting, you know, negative stuff regarding Islam. But nevertheless, Islam is spreading rapidly here in the UK, and there's rough figures about 10,000 plus people converting to Islam, which are unofficial numbers, but I'm sure there are much more than that when it comes to the census here in the UK. But I want to take Michael's opinion regarding the sentiments and the feelings among Americans regarding getting involved in this war. I know there was a split regarding the Americans. You saw the rallies, no kings and so forth. How are the population in America taking the actions of Trump and getting involved in the war against Iran? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Mike.
Sure. Well, it's pretty early here. I'm sure the liberals will be taking to the streets again. Like you said, that No Kings rally, I didn't even know it was going on until I had to drive past some of them. But first, let me say this: you guys cover a lot of ground in between speaking. I have some thoughts and then I forget them, and then something else comes up. But first, I want to say I think we bombed Iran mostly to test that weapon. I'd never even heard of that bunker buster, the GBU 57A/B.
Didn't they use them in Afghanistan to get Bin Laden and the Taliban?
No. I Googled it and I was reading the wiki page on it. It was developed in 2015. We only took delivery of 20 of them. Apparently, we used 14 of them, and it's never been deployed. So I think that was probably the main impetus for this attack, was just, let's see how it works. I thought, Yusuf, when it goes down 200 feet or 60 meters, and you said that's not very much, I thought, well, that was pretty good. Get a bomb to go through the dirt and maybe concrete and rock. And then I read one thing, a munitions expert was saying, it's very difficult to keep the explosive from exploding. It's got to be stable enough to make that penetration. And then you have to have a fuse that's smart enough to know where it's at. I mean, exploding above the ground with altimeters is one thing, going under the ground. But anyway, I think that's our main reason for doing this bombing. I was really surprised. I thought Iranians had better air defense than this. I mean, the Israelis declared
they have been under sanctions for many years. And also, I want to ask you the question regarding, do you think America was justified to attack Iran? Do you think there's any justification on the behest of Israel, of course? And there's reports that Trump received some financial gains from it. I think it was $317 million or some estimates. I don't know. I don't know if you heard anything regarding some money being swiftly moved into Trump's account for doing what he did. Do you think they're justified to attack Iran?
Sure. I think they've broken the NTP or NPT. You talk about why do
who's broken the NPT, Mike? Mike, who's broken the NPT?
The Iranians.
The United States, by attacking nuclear facilities or potential nuclear facilities, broke the NPT. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Because
that could be a possibility.
That is a fact. You see, the problem which I have with this idea, and we know each other, so I can kind of speak openly with you, is that whilst the Americans and your president, who I may add is in fact turning out to be even more worse than Bush, they're framing this whole thing as a kind of a preemptive act to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Many people in your country, even people like Tucker Carlson, for example, who was a Trump supporter, and people like on the MAGA movement, Dave Smith and Candace Owens and so on, they make the point that there's a deeper strategic logic that they're doing why Israel has attacked Iran, and why the United States has attacked now Iran. Because if it hasn't done any damage, and the main aim of these attacks are basically destabilization. For years, you had this idea, and for 20 years, we've heard this point. Americans and Israelis have argued that the only durable solution to the Iranian problem is regime change. And they've attempted this. I mean, when did Netanyahu start talking about nuclear weapons in Iran? Well, is this something that he mentioned just recently? Is this a threat?
2011.
Since 1995, Netanyahu's been talking about Iran having the capability of developing nuclear bombs since 1995. He mentioned it in 1995. He mentioned it in 1999. He mentioned it in 2003 in connection with Iraq as well. And then in 2004, Then he mentioned it in 2009, then 2011, then 2015, then 2019, during the first Bush administration, and now again. So it seems to me that for the past 25 years, for the past 30 years, if Iran's nuclear threat, if Iran's nuclear capabilities is just 3 or 4 months away, and he's been saying it from 1995, it means basically that the aspect of nuclear deterrence by attacking Iran is not the real issue, because then the man is just a liar. Have you even seen some of the proclamations of Netanyahu? Did you even have a look at any of the proclamations made by him? Are you familiar with what Netanyahu has been saying about the Iran nuclear threat since 1995? Are you familiar with that? You've seen those videos. Are you familiar with that?
I just literally Googled yesterday, when did Netanyahu start talking about Iran? I was on
1995.
And so anyways, Miss K was saying he's been saying this since the 80s, that they're 2 months away. First of all, I don't want to
play the Al Jazeera report, but there was a video that I sent Mohammed, but that's a separate video I had on my phone. He's got it, but I don't want to play some of these other videos. But they've been talking about this for 33 years. He's been talking about it. If I'm going to tell you every day that you're going to meet up in an accident, you're going to meet up in an accident if you go to work. You're going to meet up in an accident. But I've been telling you this now for 33 years. I mean, there's something that is fundamentally wrong here. And so the whole point is that if that is the case, and that was the rationale now for Israel attacking Iran, and subsequently the US and Trump who's been played, it's quite clear it's got nothing to do with nuclear weapons. So this nuclear weapons story is total hogwash. That's not the reason that they attacked. That's not the reason that the main campaign is regime change. And we know for a fact that regime change doesn't work. What can possibly happen is you could probably have a situation like Iraq, where, as bad as Saddam was, you had the creation of ISIS, you had a monstrosity that emerged out of the ruins of Iraq. Look at the evidence over the past 20 years, 25 years. Look at Afghanistan. The aim of Afghanistan, was it a success or a failure? From the United States point of view, total failure. Because the Taliban, who they wanted to get rid of, are back in power again. So this doesn't work. The whole thing is destined for failure. The aim is to destabilize the entire Middle East. And if people still believe that, this is nuclear weapons.
Brother, let me.
I just want to, because I'm just thinking about the time, and we've touched on so many amazing topics, and we've got to do a part 2 and possibly part 3 on this in the future. And everybody's welcome to come on, and Mike, Mustafa, and so forth, and Hassan, who joined us earlier. I just want to ask you, just go on the table and ask: do you think any other countries will be getting involved militarily to help Iran fight back or provide some type of ammunition? I would love to.
This is where I would like to come in, Brother Muhammad. This is exactly where I wanted to come in. This is really fascinating. This is why I wanted to make the side point over here. Now, we've also seen the aforementioned BM, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's made a comment which is widely been publicized, in which Pakistan is also a target. Now, what's the consequence of, if it's to do with nuclear weapons? Pakistan is the one Muslim country which supposedly harbors supposed terrorists within that country. So why haven't they been actually, highlighted as a state that can be attacked historically? But now we're seeing comments whereby post-Iran, Pakistan will be the next target. Now that is a nuclear country which has got a very powerful, it's generally speaking, very powerful country. Certainly in terms of the army, it's by some conservative estimates, the army is deemed as being perhaps as efficient as the American army, which for a country like Pakistan, a poor country like Pakistan, that's an extraordinary achievement. Air Force is very, very strong as well. So what do we see in terms of the potentiality of an attack on Pakistan taking place? Because he's clearly stated that, Netanyahu, that's the next port of call, because that's probably the one country, if you think about it, which does possess nuclear weapons. So is it plausible that Pakistan could perhaps also be next on the list? I do know, for example, extraordinary statements being made from eminent Pakistani political commentators and analysts who have shockingly stated that Americans, senior American military officials, they are actually controlling the Pakistani military. Senior Pakistani military personnel cannot go into the headquarters of the Pakistani army, which is near the capital, Islamabad. So I just want to get a little overview.
That's interesting,
of
Mustafa. I want
where
to
they're going to
push
go
back
there.
on that. Mustafa, I'm really sorry, but this is so interesting. The fact that India started the war just recently with Pakistan, do you think that was a test to see what kind of defenses Pakistan had?
Definitely, I think it's out of no coincidence that Israel supplies India with a lot of its weaponry. And just to indicate the point that you've made, I think it definitely was a testing ground. And I think that they're somewhat startled by the air battle which took place between Pakistan and India, and how Pakistan's air force seems to have outmaneuvered the Indian air force by the technology with China, which supposedly had inferior technology for its JF-10s and JF-35s. By the way, they're sending Pakistan 40 JF-35A stealth fighter bombers, which, perhaps one can argue are not on the same equivalence as the B-52 American bombers, but they're not far off. So the Chinese technology seems to be rapidly increasing. And this is another concern of the Americans. So, yeah, definitely, I think this was a testing ground to see if Pakistan has any capabilities to compete with an Israeli-inspired Indian tech, to see whether they can come to each other and see who has the upper hand. So I do think that this will be perhaps a next port of call. But the problem with Pakistan, you see, which is always the issue, is the effect that they can easily be bribed. You see, the Americans have already made that indication where bizarrely. Although they've been on the surface, Pakistan have been criticizing Israel relentlessly on all particular platforms. But at the same juncture, they've suggested that Donald Trump be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a bit paradoxical. So the point, again, in conclusion, is that if they do see Pakistan as the final frontier in this expansionist, perhaps of this understanding of a greater Israel, then is Pakistan next in? And Pakistan is not one country you can push about unless it's duped by the Americans, which I think the Americans are going to try to bamboozle the Pakistanis into somehow giving away all their secrets.
I'm just thinking, you're talking about Pakistan. I think if Imran Khan wasn't in jail right now, I think Pakistan would definitely be on the list. But the fact that Imran is in jail, maybe they're waiting for his demise, and then hopefully do what they've got to do, or the move that they will make. But Mustafa, you made some very interesting points. I want to ask Mike the same question before we go above. Mike, do you think anybody else will actually get involved? I know Russia recently spoken out and said they're not going to get involved because there's about 200 Russians that actually live in Israel and actually speak the native language and have got citizenship in Israel. I don't know how true that is, but Putin has recently come out with that statement. So, Mike, do you think anybody will be on the side of Iran?
No, I don't think so. I don't know who would. Other than the Chinese, but I don't think the Chinese want to get involved. I want to just say this real quick, just as an overview, thought out of the blue. I know we've touched on many tangents. This idea of America trying to dominate the world, I don't think we're that smart. I don't think we're all these conspiracy theories you guys kind of got going. I don't think we can do all that. And I think if we really wanted to take over the whole world, we would start in our own hemisphere. It would be very easy for us to take over Mexico. I mean, Canada, I think, has 55,000 people in their army. Our borders are unprotected because nobody fears us over here. You guys have us delving into every little bit in the Middle East and unstabilizing all that for, I guess, the evangelical end times philosophy or trying to rebuild the second temple or the third temple, whatever is going on with all that.
Mike, my question is, which nation has engaged in most military interventions in the past 20th century?
Of course it's America, because we are the superpower of the world. I think we mistakenly think...
interventionism has been part and parcel of the American ideological makeup. You agree with me? There's no debating that.
Absolutely, but it's not for colonial dominance. I mean, obviously, we held the
Well, I mean,
Philippines
you
up
know,
to the
the
Spanish
point is
American
that that's also debatable. It depends on how you define what colonialism means. I mean, we're not talking about settler colonialism or the idea of
Okay.
colonialism in the classic 18th century or 19th century imperialist sense, but colonialism in other. I mean, look at Africa, for example. If you look at things like there's an interesting book I recommended to you some months back, probably a year ago, called "The Globalization of Poverty" by Michel Chazdowski, and he discusses how in Africa these states, and I don't want to veer off the topic of what we're dealing with tonight, but how in all these third world countries, you've got the World Bank, you've got the International Monetary Fund that basically impose these structural adjustment programs and hold these countries indebted to empire and to the United States for decades to come. And so the establishment of US bases in all these strategic locations of the earth, you look at the South African context, our wealth, our mineral wealth. Who controls our mineral wealth? Do you know who controls our mineral wealth in South Africa? It's the Americans and the British. It's the Americans and the British that control our mineral wealth, our gold and diamonds. Not a single mining house in South Africa, has a sales office locally. They're all based in Europe. You look at AngloGold Ashanti, you look at all the De Beers, you look at the whole lot of that. It's always been about the takeover of wealth, the major multinational cartels, the military industrial complex. So your idea of colonialism may have evolved, but the concept of empire has essentially remained the same and has continued. Of course, America is now at its some have stated at its last stages, but certainly does hold a degree of dominance at some capacity, but that is quickly shifting. And to come back to the issue of Mohammed's question, well, I don't know if Pakistan will get involved or, Pakistan is a problematic country. And, with the incarceration of Imran Khan, who the vast majority of Pakistanis, in fact, support, they're easily corruptible. They can be easily bought. It's obscene. And I just saw the comment made by Mustafa about the nomination of Trump. I saw that earlier, but I thought it was probably fake news until I saw it in BBC, that Pakistan wants to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. And Trump himself has stated that he's the right candidate. Imagine that. The guy says he should be the Nobel Peace Prize recipient. And you've got a country like Pakistan, a Muslim country, that wants to nominate him, a man who is basically authorized. And by the way, Mike, just one other point. Attacking any country without congressional backing is illegal in terms of the American Constitution. You are aware of that. And that's why when you saw Bernie Sanders this morning, or early this morning, you saw the images and videos on NBC, he was perplexed and gobsmacked when he got the report that Trump, the so-called pro-peace, anti-war, make America great again, decided to bomb illegally another nation. So this whole idea, it's like it's an oxymoron. It's paradoxical. We're living in contradictory times. And I mean, if nothing could be more Orwellian, I just want to end with this before you make a comment. Nothing could be more Orwellian when he tweets this morning, we've done the job, we've bombed and struck and destroyed all these nuclear facilities. And then he ends it by saying, now is the time for peace. Take care, or till next time, or something along that particular line. I mean, this is Orwellian, Huxleyan language. And if people are still wanting to debate, does Iran have nuclear weapons? Does it not have nuclear weapons? Regime change and all of that. I mean, we need to go beyond that. If we cannot see, we can't even take sides in this. You can't take sides. There is only one side, and it's a side of evil. And we see the satanic evil of the Israeli state for the past year and a half. And we now see the enablers, whether it's Biden, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, they're the same, simply continuing what we see in the Middle East.
I mean, Mike, would you openly and wholeheartedly condemn the actions of Israel during this genocide of the Palestinians?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is a genocide. I think they're killing the Gazans to wipe them out and take the land. That seems obvious. But real quick, I think Trump ended his tweet with, thank you for your attention in this matter. The other thing is, the War Powers Act, I think, started under Vietnam, that allowed mission creep, that gave the president all sorts of powers to do these military strikes without congressional declaration of war. I'm 100% against. As a democracy, I think we've given too much power to our president. Our checks and balances are out of balance these days. We need to go back to, obviously, if we're attacked directly, somebody needs to respond without hours of debate. But yes, to fly over another country and drop bombs on them, there's no reason. Trump said, well, I'll make this decision in 2 weeks, and 3 days later he did it or whatever. Congress should have been able to debate
You
this.
see the beauty of the matter. Sorry to interrupt. The beauty of the matter here is that why don't America try that with North Korea? Then we can see how brave they are. You see, we know America is facing North Korea directly with its bases and troops that it has in South Korea. Why doesn't it take? Because they were also amongst the axis of evil. It wasn't just all those Islamic countries which have been cited, but North Korea was as well. Now, America do if they're really brave, why don't they do such?
Right, and that's the other thing, that you guys make our government out to be these strategic geniuses that are taking over the world. Right, in his first term, he called Kim Jong-un little rocket man, and I'll unleash hell or something. He said some crazy thing that made it sound like we were going to use nukes and stuff. The North Koreans developed their nukes. I think they bought them mostly from Pakistan, right? They bought them from Khan. Is Khan still under house arrest?
No, he's dead. He's died. He died a few years ago.
Okay. Yeah. The nuclear physicist out of Pakistan, the father of Pakistan.
He was also released from house arrest early.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was also done on the behest to humiliate him in his end days. But the thing is here that North Korea, are you aware, Mike, has the ability to reach America? It's quite unique.
They might be able to hit Hawaii, yeah.
That's right, but there's some indications that they've recently, with the help of China, been able now to reach the mainland USA as well.
I mean, most of their missiles fail upon launch, and their destroyer just capsized at its inauguration ceremony.
But at the same juncture, they are getting the
destroyer, I think.
At the same juncture, they are getting the latest sophisticated weaponry from Russia. So that is a country America wouldn't even in its wildest dreams try to attack.
Right,
so
or China or Russia, hopefully. I mean, to call us cowards because we don't want to take on a nuclear power smacks me as just strange. I mean, that seems like a smart thing. That's why people develop nukes. Is that
exactly? So this is this is the point I've been commenting on relentless platforms, that if you don't have nukes, you are susceptible. You are in big trouble. And North Korea now can poke his chest out to the Americans, and there's not a jot they can do about it.
Well, I mean, South Africa had 6 atom bombs or something. They gave them up voluntarily in 89 or 91.
What does this tell you? I think what does Mustafa's comments tell you? That if Iran, or if I was an Iranian,
we're cowards for not attacking a nuclear-armed country.
I need to get a nuclear weapon. If Israel can have, and I'm against nuclear weaponry, but everybody then has to basically disarm. That won't be ideal. I mean, if everybody theoretically disbands, North Korea, China, Russia, United States, United Kingdom, everybody, the world will be a peaceful place, but they won't. That won't happen. And so this sets a dangerous precedent. If you're a nuclear power, they won't attack you. If you're not a nuclear power, like Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction, they destroyed them. Iran now, no weapons of mass destruction. They destroy. They've got the potential to destroy them.
Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine gave up their nukes to Russia for a peace treaty that they wouldn't be invaded. So to say giving up nukes would make the world more peaceful, it would certainly.
I'm saying if everybody does it, if Israel and Iran does it, everybody does that, which won't happen. Right. It's an idealistic world that we're talking about. But if everybody were to do that, and we were just using enrichment uranium to benefit society and not to support the kind of military-industrial complex, the world would be a much better, much safer place. And I think we can all agree on that. So if one thing that has been learned, if the United States does not attack Iran again, we don't know what the future holds. But the one thing that the Iranians may learn from this is that it's more better to then take the enrichment of uranium to its final conclusion, and that is to develop nuclear weapons. So a country which was kind of marginally supporting and a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is now talking about backing out from it completely. Then you've got no checks and balances, because if Israel can back out of it, if North Korea is not a signatory to it, why should Iran even bother now? They're getting attacked all the way. So the point is, at the end of the day, it goes back to the original summation. This has got nothing to do with nuclear weapons. It's got everything to do with regime change, everything to do with taking over the setup of the Middle East. Mohammed, whilst we were here, could we put that screen up back again? Because this is something which vindicates what you, myself, Brother Mustafa, and even Adam recently taken the position. This is a report which I thought I needed to show. It's published in May, where almost the consensus amongst genocide scholars globally, so it's not just me as non-experts, but genocide scholars, is that Israel is in fact committing genocide. This is a Dutch investigation, Middle East Eye, published in May 2025. The paper interviewed 7 renowned genocide and Holocaust researchers from 6 countries, including Israel, all of whom described the Israeli campaign as genocidal. Many said their peers in this field share the assessment. Can I name someone whose work I respect who does not think this is genocide? The response, no. There is no counter-argument that takes into account all the evidence, Israeli researcher Raz Siegel told NRC. Professor Umut Angor of the University of Amsterdam and the head of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies said that whilst there are certainly researchers that say it's not genocide, I don't know any of them. I've got this document. It's on PDF. We don't have time to share this. We may do a separate program on this. But it appears to me now that there is no debate anywhere. Look at the individuals. This is the lady who is Melanie O'Brien. That's her name. Yeah, Melanie O'Brien. She's a president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. She told NRC, the Dutch paper, that Israel's deliberate denial of food, water, shelter, and sanitation was a key factor in the determination that the military campaign was genocide. In fact, if you look at the reports by some of these writers, and you go to the actual report, which is even published by Boston University, they stated that the threshold of genocide is so high that it even exceeds that of Rwanda or what was found at the International Criminal Tribunal of the former Yugoslavia, particularly the area of Srebrenica. That's how high the standard that Israel has met. It's gone beyond the standard. You know, there's 5 major categories. And of course, the aspect of specific intent and dolus specialis. All these scholars state, from an academic point of view, that they've even gone beyond that particular threshold, far beyond what Rwanda did, far beyond what Yugoslavia did in terms of conveying genocidal intent. So I just want people to see this. That
brother, sorry, I don't mean to. I don't mean to. I do want to tie it back because to the whole Iran, and it's directly related to what you're saying, brother. By the way, but also brother Mustafa brought up the Iran and Israel conspiracy. Are they working together? I just want to kind of paint. I feel like I'm viewing a different Middle East than you. Okay, so we were viewing a very large chess game, or imagine a very large chessboard, a grand chessboard, if you will. Yeah. And the thing was that Iran was engaged since 1979, right? Because you guys said, oh, maybe they work together, and sometimes they do. But the thing is, though, since 1979, Iran has had a single motto, which is, against the United States, and of course, death to Israel as well. So Khomeini, for example, I just learned this. Khomeini was virulently anti-Semitic. Like, for example, by the way, you had the Neturai Karta Rabbi Weiss on lately. So you obviously draw a distinction between Jews and Zionists. Khomeini had no such distinction in his head. But anyway, so the thing is, though, the other aspect of this is, though, they had 40,000 rockets in Lebanon pointed at Israel. They had 40,000 rockets in Gaza pointed at Israel. These are all Iranian rockets, by the way, because, I don't know much about the military, but, in order to have a decent rocket, you need to weld it and solder it, and it can't fall apart, So to have a good one that can fly across to a 100 kilometers or so, you need Iran, Gazans are not doing this by themselves. So this is a grand chessboard, right? And so the Iran and you, brother Michael here brought up the North Korea. Since 1995, right? The world has seen that if you are an unstable or irrational regime and you acquire nuclear weapons, you can hoodwink the world into giving you aid or sanctions, and nobody comes in your name. It's not the conventional weapons that keeps you hands off, red hot potato, but it's the nuclear. So Iran thought, not only do I have 40,000 weapons in Lebanon, not only do I have 40,000 rockets pointed at Israel in Gaza, I can instigate. This is the thing. This is the cat's paw, by the way. That's what a proxy is. So they had this cat's paw in Hezbollah and Hamas. And so then, of course, they had their nuclear program. And the last thing is their ballistic weapons program. So Hamas is decimated, Gaza is destroyed, tragedy, the war crime of collective punishment. But the Lebanon, the Hezbollah was blown up, with the pagers. Now here's the funny, I don't want to say funny, but the Syrian revolution has come to an end because that was also caused by Israel destroying the Shia fighters funded by Iran. So Sunnis win actually in the Middle East because of this like chess game, right? Sometimes the queen gets promoted to a pawn. And finally, I'm going to wrap it up. So the idea is the only thing now that Iran's nuclear program has been knocked out, chess program, the only thing that Iran has is this ballistic weapons program, which is weapons that can fly to Israel. And Israel only has about, I heard, 30 days of counter missiles left. So now Iran is just going to rain a barrage of missiles from Iran itself. And Israel really, I don't know. We'll see. I'll pause there. Thank you.
But you know one thing, just on this particular point, are you aware of the fact that Iran's chief rabbi, and this you can check up on the Yidioth Aronot, he has come out and has condemned Israel's strike on Iran. Are you aware of that? So I don't think, we've had, and of course we had members of the Netrei Karta going to Israel and to Iran and meeting with the Iranian leadership and so on. I don't think there's any kind of anti-Semitism. This is the idea that Iran is an anti-Semitic entity. It's not an anti-Semitic. Jews, there's Jewish synagogues in Iran. There are very few Sunni mosques in Iran. In fact, Sunnis face a great amount of discrimination in Iran than the Jewish and the Baha'i or the Christian communities. So the idea that Iran is somehow the other anti-Jewish.
Anyway, the point is, though, I'm sorry, they had this attack in Buenos Aires. They blew up a Jewish center in Buenos Aires. Those Jewish people had nothing to do with Israel. They were just attacking weak targets. And then they also, they've been attacking the U.S. So, with the Al-Khobar and then the Beirut bombing too. That was the first bombing, suicide bombing in the Middle East when Hezbollah packed some explosives and they killed 243 Marines. And then Reagan pulled out. So this has been Iran's cat's paw, and the chess game completely flipped over. That's all I want to say.
Anam, the attack in Beirut was after the invasion of Lebanon. Why did Israel go and invade Lebanon and engage?
Yeah, but that was an American. That was against America.
And it was also after the Sabra and Shatila massacre. So you had those bombings that took place after the worst massacre.
Iran was funding all these proxies for since '83. They've been pouring money, and now this is all neutralized. The whole chess game is flipped over, by the way, since which is we live in a quite an extraordinary time, but I don't see the conspiracy that Brother Mustafa hinted. But yeah, I see the Iranian regime.
I don't see a conspiracy as such, but I'm saying I don't find it problematic that Iran, to a certain extent, backed the resistance. I don't see that as problematic. Ideologically, what I'm saying is what is problematic about that? What is problematic if they backed Hamas for that particular matter or Islamic Jihad? What is problematic about that?
What it is using other people as chess pieces. That's my problem.
But this is what happens in all conflicts. Israel, for example, is a proxy of the United States. If that is the case, then one could make the argument that Israel is a proxy of the United States.
That is, I think that's this is why I'm kind of for example, I think living in the US, right, Muslims really supported Trump more than the other guy because they were sick of the unwavering support that Biden was showing for Gaza. But instead we get this, and I think we just have to think how in other words,
they're different sides of the same coin, and the different sides of the very same coin, different cheeks of the same backside, as George Galloway would say.
I don't know how they could think it would have gotten any better under this guy. I really think, because Anyway, like I mean,
Well,
my thing is,
besides that,
there's
Brother
no
Muhammad
reason for the
mentioned
US to get involved. I don't understand this part.
The imams in the UK, but I mean, look at the adulation. I mean, look at our Muslim countries. Pakistan now wants him to get the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, you saw the idol worship on display when he was trumpeting around in the Middle East. I mean,
yeah, they waited.
I've never seen that display. Women, whatever funny dance was happening, you saw the insanity on display there.
Yeah, the weapons deals.
It's like protection money being paid to this individual.
And then the $400 million plane.
I don't know if a lot of these deals actually go through, or whether they are just symbolic at that particular point in time. Maybe they could have been signed behind the scenes. I don't know. But the point is that this kind of adulation and subservience and acquiescence to power, and I think the masses in the Muslim world are dissatisfied. We're dissatisfied with our own leadership. We're dissatisfied with the global empire. And there needs to be a kind of an ethical, not a kind of a radical, because you've got two extremes. You've got the one extreme, you've got the other extreme. There needs to be kind of an ethical undertone where the communities at large create sustainable, Quranic-centric societies at the grassroots levels, and then, of course, develop at that particular stage. And this is a problem that you've got. You've got the problem where the Muslim world is in the mess that it is. I don't have solutions or answers to it. What I can simply say is that you've got a toolbook, and I don't want to say this at a kind of a superficial level, but you've got the Quran and the prophetic paradigm. It doesn't give you ready-made solutions, but it gives you a praxis. It gives you the tools within which you as an individual can utilize a prophetic paradigm and the Quran to develop solutions to the problems in your society. And the more Muslims recognize that, you develop solutions, you develop that's when you would see the Sharia as a true problem-solving methodology, as opposed to taking these extreme positions one way or the other. And I think that's a problem with the Muslim world. So this is as a result of, there's so many factors that one could basically reason as to why we find ourselves in the state that we find ourselves in, that the entire world stood silent for more than 1.5 years when there was open slaughter, when children and babies are being slaughtered, and we just simply sit back and we can do nothing. The international community can do nothing, and the Muslim community can do nothing, and the Muslim armies can do nothing, and the Muslim nation states that surround the small, tiny piece of land called the satanic regime of Israel can do nothing, because they are too beholden towards power, or too afraid, or too subservient, or simply do not have the gall to, or the determination or will to do anything which may basically challenge the empire out there, or whatever we see as representative of that. This is a problem.
Yusuf, mashallah, 2 hours have gone swiftly by. Jazakallah khair for this beautiful interaction with the audience that you did. With guest panelists coming on. We've got Mustafa still on the show here. Mustafa, final thoughts with you, and then inshallah ta'ala we can wrap the show up, because it's coming over to Maghrib here. It's just gone 9:10, and I've got to get ready for Maghrib, so after Maghrib here in the UK. Mustafa, anything that you would like to add before we wrap the show up? I don't know if Mustafa's there.
Thank you for allowing me to speak on this platform. It's great to be back again and share.
It's great to have you again, Mustafa. I forgot to say, it's great to have you. I wish you could have been. You were with us, I think, when we first started with Brother Muhammad, and I always appreciate, and I've seen you online, and I really appreciate your contributions. We need you quite often on these programs.
Oh, that's very kind. I'm just learning from very erudite people such as yourself. So alhamdulillah, thank you so much, and look forward to the future shows, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu
alaikum. Just a quick reminder, brothers and sisters, I've put my Patreon link above in the chat here on my YouTube channel. I'm asking for £1 a month, and that helps me buy 3 copies of the Quran. So please go to my Patreon, or otherwise you can go to my account here. As you can see, a Monzo account. You've got the account number here, then you've got a sort number 040003. That's my account, my charity account, which helps me collect donations for various projects. So either you can go to my Patreon or go to the Commentary Faith Foundation account there in Monzo and donate £1 a month, and that helps me, like I said, gets me 3 Qurans here in Commentary. Mashallah, the dawah is going rapidly, swiftly forward, mashallah. From one dawah stall, we've got 3 dawah stalls now here in Coventry, and the effects that it's having here in the population of Coventry, it's humongous, it's beautiful. And like I said, just over the weekend, on Saturday, we had about 5 to 6 shahadas in one day here in Coventry. And mashallah, I'd like to bless the brothers and sisters who participate in the dawah stores and giving out free information and Qur'ans to Muslims and non-Muslims. It's quite surprisingly here in Coventry, Brother Yusuf, is that non-Muslims are so interested in getting literature that helps them debunk and kind of like give answer back to the non-Muslims. And we still have the IDCI. They publish a lot of Ahmadidat's material, and may Allah reward Ahmadidat to the highest rank in paradise. His literature is still going strong today, mashallah. And
is his literature available? There was his literature,
yes,
in Birmingham, I believe, and there
That's
was
correct.
an IPCI in Durban, in Birmingham as well. Brother Shamshad Khan had some of his material.
Yeah, there's a beautiful organization called the IDCI, I think it is, in Nichols in Birmingham, and they distribute all that for free, all the Ahmadidat material for free. A wonderful group of brothers, mashallah, so generous and so kind. So yeah, brothers and sisters, keep the brothers in your du'as, the brothers who do the dawah here in Coventry and across the UK, and of course the brothers and sisters of Palestine. Let's not forget them. I know this, for me, sometimes we get dragged to one side regarding the conflict regarding Iran and Israel, but at the same time this is happening. Israel is continuing their genocide and the killing of the innocent in Gaza and West Bank. Let's not forget the people of Palestine. Please keep them in your du'as throughout the day and night. Brother Yusuf, last words to you before we end the show.
Well, thanks again, Brother Mohammed. I think it's important that we always keep ourselves abreast of what's going on. We will continue speaking about the Gaza genocide. That hasn't stopped, and that is clearly a genocide as happening. The world should not be distracted by these attacks and not take their eyes off the ball, particularly in terms of what is happening in Gaza. We are living in dangerous times. We are living in problematic and troublesome times. We should obviously always make supplication and ask Allah to help, ask the Almighty to assist wherever we can. And of course, we need to struggle, and we need to expose the falsehood. We need to speak out against injustice wherever we see it, be it in our own communities, abroad, or globally. And I think that's going to be a long-term project and a continuous one of both the South African Debate Initiative and certainly the Coventry Faith Foundation. So you keep up your fantastic work on the streets of Coventry. And certainly here from me in South Africa, I want to wish my brethren and sisters, both in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and other parts of the world, greetings of peace. We always greet you with peace. This is what we've been doing for 1400 years ago. We don't mean it superficially in tweets. We mean it in actual intent. So till then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and peace be upon everybody.